I'd say to people, just be ready. If there's something that you want to do and you know you want to do it, have your plan and be ready. But know that you might have 5 shut doors before one opens, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you're ready, then when that door opens, you're ready to jump through it.
I'm very excited for this New South Wales Through Their Eyes series for the International Day of the Girl Child, that we're joined by Minister Taylor, who I have the great fortune of working with, and I know is a strong advocate for children and young people, and especially women. You are the Minister for Women, Minister for Mental Health, and the Minister for Regional Youth. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Zoe. It's always fun to talk to you.
I'm so excited because I'm sure there's little gems that you may not share that we get to unpack together, because I've got to work with you now for a little bit over a year, so that's exciting. But first, start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So what about, so I had a bit of a weird childhood. I grew up in different countries all over the world because Dad worked for Qantas. So I moved around a lot. So I had to make sort of different friends at different times and things. But in a funny way, I only look back now and think that was unusual because at the time I really didn't know anything else. So mostly grew up, sort of had the first 6 years of my life in New York and then between Thailand and the Philippines. And then came out to Australia being really weird because I had a really strong American accent because I'd obviously learnt to speak in the States and been to American schools. So that was different. But and then had the real privilege of going to school in Sydney, and I actually could sort of bed down some roots. And that was really good. And then I, didn't know what I wanted to do, like a lot of young people, I think. And I was at one of those careers nights at school, and this incredible girl came and spoke, Edwina Saunders. And she had been an oncology nurse over in England. And I thought, I really want to do that. She's so amazing, and that just really resonates with me. So went off and I did nursing, and that was just incredible. And I had 20 years as a nurse working in the city and in the country. I married my husband and we moved down to Cooma, and I became a farmer's wife, which was pretty interesting because I was pretty useless at that. And so I was really pleased that I had a career and I had a profession that I could go to, and it gave me a real role in the community. And then that's how I got into politics, because I just felt that, some things needed to change down there, and they needed to change with, health services and things. So that's what's brought me here. And I just have this amazing job now, and I pinch myself because I can't quite believe it. And it's been really exciting, and I've been really lucky. Lots of jumps and hurdles along the way too, but I think that's what makes us stronger. And I think that's sometimes something that we worry about when we look at things and we see them as a failure, but I actually see a failure as an opportunity to build on your strengths and to give something another crack, and I think that's really important.
And we don't always talk about failure, which I think is so important to talk about that and kind of embrace it as well. And you would have been through so much change with all that travel and studying new schools and making a lot of friends, and so it's really important to talk about how you take those failures and turn them into amazing opportunities.
Why don't we talk? Now I'm going to ask you, but why don't we talk about that anymore? I think it's so important. It's like we're frightened to, but actually we should wear it as a badge of honour and a badge of surviving something and a badge of moving on and looking at different ways to do things.
Yeah, and I think it's a word, right? People say it's such an ugly word when actually we've all had them. We've all had them in various capacities, and you can take them and make them into amazing things. And I think it's one of those things that children and young people really do need to hear about, the fact that successful women, successful people have all had failures in their life, but have made it something that they learn from, something that they take with them, something that makes them the kind of leader or person they want to be in the future. We have the great fortune of sharing, well, I think it's a great fortune, but we're both alumni of the same school. And I obviously have a very soft spot in my heart for oncology nurses because I think you do an amazing job. And my father passed away from cancer, and the nurses are the people who kept the dignity. But that's a really interesting path to take to then get into politics. And so, I mean, one of the things I'd love to know is the massive difference between being a nurse and being a politician. But also you did touch a little bit on that path of getting into politics. So what did drive that passion?
Is a massive difference. And can I tell you, so much better saying you're a nurse than a politician to people. And I might just fib occasionally and say that I'm a nurse and not sort of fess up.
Well, you do still have I remember you saying during COVID that
I got re-registered.
You got re-registered, ready to go.
Really, really quite exciting for me. So look, I just loved being a nurse, and there are many days that I really miss it. And actually, Zoe, you don't know this, but I was in hospital yesterday and I had to have something done, and I had the best nurses, and I just walked out sort of waving at everyone and just going up to each of them and saying, you are so good at what you do, because I went in and I was really nervous and really anxious, and they made me feel safe, and they're so professional and they're just so incredible, and particularly during this time what they've done in our health system is just amazing. And, you know, it was interesting, there were flight attendants who used to be nurses who were working on the ward, you know, because of COVID and there's no flights. And so it actually really brought me back to my nursing and why I loved it so much. I think for me, I spent a lot of time I specialised in palliative care. But what I saw was just this amazing transition during my career of people that I would go and see who had bowel cancer and they actually had metastatic disease in their liver, and I knew they probably only had a few months to live, whereas now people live for years with metastatic disease. So it's been quite incredible, and that's what I saw through my practice in Cooma, was that I started off doing palliative care, but people were living longer and living better. And so I had to upskill myself in terms of, you know, being able to de-access pumps for them and things, because if I didn't, they'd have a 4-hour drive, meant they couldn't pick their kids up from school. It just seemed ridiculous. And so it started me in this. I had a really amazing bunch of patients at the time. I had a vet and I had this lovely bloke, Noel Anderson, and I still remember them all. And I kept saying, wouldn't it be great if we could do this in Cooma and you didn't have to drive up? And people think, oh, Cooma's only an hour and a bit from Canberra, but people don't feel comfortable driving into Canberra. You forget about Thredbo and the snow on the roads, and you forget about people down in Delegate, you know, on the Victorian border. And I knew that we could do it safely, and I knew we could do it well. There's a lot of things that we shouldn't do in a lot of our regional and rural hospitals because we don't have the expertise, because we want good outcomes, right? But what I saw, say, a lady who had been diagnosed with breast cancer who would opt to have a radical mastectomy, so her whole breast removed, rather than a lumpectomy. So rather than just having that lump excised and keeping your breast, because she didn't want to be away from home to access the treatment that she needed. Now, that really didn't sit well with me because I'd lived in Sydney, I'd trained in Sydney, I knew what was available. So this group of patients at the time said, well, you know, I think we should really fight for this, Bronnie, and we can do something locally. And I thought, well, you know what, you're right. And look, I wasn't that popular at the health service. I probably, you know, had to read the code of conduct quite a few times. But I kept persisting, and there were this amazing bunch of women in this community group, and they said, what do you think we need, Bronnie? What should we aim our fundraising at? And I said, we need a local oncology service. And that's where it sort of all began. So I got to be part of this ferocious, incredible bunch of women, rural women, that thought, let's get this done. And we did a big fundraiser, and we did Cooma's Dancing with the Stars, and I was Sonia Kruger. I know, nice. Quite hard to imagine, but you know. But we had so much fun, and we got local doctors, we got sort of local identities, and it was just incredible. And we raised all this money, and we opened an oncology service in Cooma that was, so the floor in that oncology unit, the lino, the curtains around the chairs is all money fundraised from the community. And that was, I think, almost 7 and a bit years ago that we did that. And it's still going, and it's going strong. And it means that, you know, a mum can come into the clinic, have her chemotherapy, and she can pick her children up from school in the afternoon. How fantastic is that?
And so important, you know, it was women together leading this charge, but also what you touch on there is the different experiences that people have. So the mums who do want to be able to pick their kids up from school and their own feeling that they're having around their treatment. And so I think even understanding your patients and their needs, you know, you really drove that. And so what's the political journey been like for you? Because obviously you're now a minister with a very large portfolio, but how did you get to this point?
So I had no political experience, right? I wasn't that interested. I've never been interested in politics. I'd never been a member of a political party. But living where I did, we're a bellwether seat, so it sways with government. So it's quite interesting because you sort of know often with the way our seat falls how the whole sort of country or state will fall. So I guess I became interested, but I didn't align with anything. I just wanted, and look, I was tapped on the shoulder by Melinda Pavey, who is another female Nationals MLC, and she came down to Cooma. She actually heard about me because I was nursing a lady who was really strong in the National Party, and I used to come in and, you know, nurse her, and she never wanted to talk about, she had pancreatic cancer and never wanted to talk about her disease or how she was feeling. She wanted to talk about the fact that she felt I'd belonged in politics and I needed to have a voice for the community. And I thought it was all a bit of a joke, to be honest, like, really. And then I met Mel, and then Mel kept ringing me, as women do. She kept following up and she kept saying, I think you can really do this. And so then that's how it started. I had a bit of a misstart. I went for pre-selection the first time and thought I was going to win easily and failed miserably. And that was absolutely devastating for me, and had to pick myself up off the floor and decide this was something I really wanted. So I went in and I had another shot and I got in, and I've been really fortunate. I've had great opportunities that have arisen that I've taken up, and I've worked hard. And 4 years in, I got to be a minister, which is a pretty amazing gig. And I love mental health. I love being back in health. And I love the fact that we've got this new portfolio for regional youth that shines a really important light. Yeah. And obviously to be Minister for Women, I mean, that's a bit of a dream come true, really. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And you touched on there some of the things that you're obviously passionate about in terms of your own background. But also you talked about the fact that you thought you'd get in there straight away, and again, a bit of a failure, and you had to pick yourself up. So how do you pick yourself up in kind of the world that you're in now? I mean, I imagine being in nursing and the kind of nursing you were in, palliative care, you probably had to pick yourself up daily to continue to serve and care for people at that time in their life. So how do you get through that, and what advice would you have for young people who want to get into politics, and young women particularly?
I'd say to people now that failing that pre-selection and failing that so badly really defined me, because it would have been easier to walk away and not have another crack. And that's how I felt at the time. I remember it so vividly. And I remember ringing up Dougal Mitchell, who was the husband of Susan, who was my patient who had died, and said, I didn't get it. I just can't, I worked so hard. I travelled around the state. I spoke to all these people that said they'd vote for me, and then they didn't. You got to love politics. But it was such a great thing. And I vividly remember I was at home and I was in the laundry and I was doing washing and I was slamming stuff everywhere. And my husband came in and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just, I just can't believe that they said they'd vote for me and they didn't choose me, and I've got so much to offer. And he just said, well, what are you going to do? You're going to just sit here and slam everything and get angry, or are you going to work towards the next one? And I was so cross with him. And I said, well, I'll be too old. I think I was 43 or something. I mean, what was I? Anyway, I said, I'll be too old. I'll be 45, whatever. He said, that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And that might sound harsh, but it was actually what I needed to hear. And then I had some really amazing people in the National Party who rang me over the subsequent weeks, and they said, you're going to be really good at this. This is what we need to do. We're going to put our arms around you and we're going to guide you through. And that was just the most terrific thing for me. So I wanted it. I was hungry. I tasted defeat and I didn't like it. And I thought, right, so that was a big project for me. Then I ran for local council and I did really well in that. And I was really lucky. It was a by-election and I got in. And then I became Deputy Mayor the year after that. So it allowed me to lift my profile and do what I wanted to do. And I loved local government in country towns. It's really great because it's not politically aligned. So you can really put your community first. So even if I disagreed with the policy of the National Party, I wasn't there representing the National Party. I was there representing the Cooma Monaro Shire. So I loved local government. I think if anyone has the opportunity to run for local council and they're interested, put your hand up, because it's a terrific place to be and it's really grassroots stuff. So, and look, politics is tough, and the last couple of weeks have been brutal for us in New South Wales, particularly as a member of the Nats. But I just know I want to walk out of here being the person that I walked in, and I want to have my morals and my values intact. So I'll just continue to abide by that, and I have a really good team around me. I like to mix it up in my team. I don't like to have all people that have been involved in politics for a long time. I like to have people that have absolutely no interest as well, because you have to reset all the time, and you need to reset in your communities, because Macquarie Street's a terrible bubble and some people just do not put a pinprick in that bubble, and I think that's a mistake. So I think as long as you are true to yourself, you know what you want to achieve, and also that you appreciate, like I know with my ministry now, that it could all be taken away tomorrow. So I need to work hard while I'm here. I need to make the most of it, and I need to ensure but I get good policy changes that have really good outcomes, because that's what it's all about, yeah.
And in that, there's a bit about patience as well, it seems, because, you know, you were so eager to do this and then you had to, you know, pick yourself back up and then give it the time. And I think, you know, it's interesting when you talk about being 43 and you thought you'd be too old. I think a lot of young people think that they need to be doing those things instantly right now, and I need to have it right now. And being able to be patient, it's one of the things that people have told me, and I'm sure you get this from working with me, is that I do need to learn patience, and it's not going to happen overnight, and that's okay. But there's the things that you learn along the way that will make that moment better. So the local council for you and all of that. So I think it's incredibly important. But then also in this job, you do really have to run hard at something to get things done, because as you say, it could not be your portfolio. And
that's right.
You want to make sure that you've got a great legacy in the work that you have done, which from what I know, you definitely are doing great work in all of your portfolios right now.
But it's all the people around you, isn't it? Like, it's like, you know, working with, like, I didn't know how much The Advocate did before I came into this role. I really didn't have a huge idea, and now I know how important it is. So you build up people that become champions for what you do. So I'm a real champion now for anyone wants to touch, you know, The Advocate in the office. I'm not going to let it happen on my watch, because I know how important it is. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about building those sort of relationships and those strengths with good people that want good outcomes. But also too, I'd say to people, just be ready. If there's something that you want to do and you know you want to do it, have your plan and be ready. But know you might have 5 shut doors before one opens, but that's okay. Yeah. But if you're ready, then when that door opens, you're ready to jump through it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a very personal experience from the conversation you and I had before I took on this job. And I didn't know that I would be ready for it, and I didn't know what would happen. But, you know, I had amazing support in yourself and Minister Ward and other people around me, including people I'd worked with in government and outside. And so you just kind of have to step into it and then nurture those relationships. So with all of this going on, I know that obviously you are a strong country girl, even though you talked about being in New York. But how do you enjoy downtime? What does that look like for you? And how do you kind of take yourself out of Macquarie Street and, you know, kind of get back in touch with your community and take time for yourself?
I'm not very good at it. You know, I'm one of those people too that I tell people, you know, it's so important to have your health checks. It's so important to do things that need to get done. And I'm becoming this person that does the opposite of what my advice is, which is really dangerous. So I've really got to check that. I try to be tough on my office and say, look, I need to get home. And that's where I can reset. And also it's important for me because I need to be able to connect with my friends and people outside of politics, because that gives you the perspective. You don't get the perspective here. And so that's difficult. And it's difficult in this role because you can always do more. But I think sometimes as politicians, we make that mistake where, you know, I'll run in and do a visit and they'll block up 8 meetings for me in a day. It's not effective use of my time. You know, you need the greatest gift you can give someone is your time and your attention and you're listening to them, isn't it, really? So you need to make sure you have time to do that. But for me, I love getting home. I love being on the farm. I love my family. I really love my husband, and so I love to see him, and he's a great reset for me.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not a good person to give advice like that because I'm a bit of a hypocrite, but I think that will be to my detriment, because I think when your tank runs out of fuel, you're no good to anyone. So that's why I really admire, you know, my boss at the moment, who's John, who's taken some leave and been really open about the fact that he needs to do that. And I think that we need to have more of those conversations. And I think maybe COVID's allowed us that opportunity to look for a bit of a better work-life balance. And I think you're always in this juggle, aren't you? That you think, okay, I've got this, like in this job, I know it's for a finite amount of time and I want to get stuff done. So I just need to stay really focused on what I need to do. But also make sure that I top up my tank. But look, to be quite honest, I haven't figured it out yet, Zoe.
I know that I sometimes do send you a message and I'm like, how are you? And you're like, and I think it's hard, right? Because you want to get so much done and you don't want to let that stop. But I think it's also about your friends being accountable to you and saying, why don't you come have a cup of tea with us? Why don't you just sit with us? And being able to reset it as well when you go home must be the nice part of it. So you're a mother of 2 girls, is that right? Mm-hmm. So one of the questions that we always ask in this is, what advice would you give to children and young people of New South Wales? And because obviously it's International Day of the Girl Child, and you are a mum, you probably have given them lots of advice. So what's some advice that you want to give young women and young girls particularly on this day, but what's some advice that you'd give them in New South Wales?
I think the greatest thing and the greatest gift that we have as Australians is the access to an incredible education. And I think if you make the most of that in whatever form that takes, that doesn't mean that you need to get a 99 ATAR, right? Fantastic if you do. But, take that ability to be a thinker, take the ability to learn to use your voice in whatever capacity that is. Some people can use it really loudly and really strongly, but other people need to back up those people with the intellect and the rigour and the vigour around the discussion. But I think we all have a responsibility to be able to use our voice. And as I said, I don't just mean, I find it easy to talk and I like to get out there. A lot of people don't like to do that, but those people's voices are just as important. Yeah. I think we need to listen. And I think sometimes we have to, provide that empathy to other people. I think sometimes we all get very caught up in our own world and in our own thing, what's happening. And I think that we need to divert that in how we can help other people, because the greatest reward, is when you actually do something for someone else.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we can do that, women have a great opportunity at the moment and they are kicking goals. And yes, there's a lot more ceilings to crack, but I think that we have to make sure too that we get that balance. And the other thing I say to people is you don't have to do it all at once either. Life comes in really interesting phases and stages. And if anyone had said to me that I was going to have 2 different careers, I never would have believed them. But the great thing is with my nursing, I thought, well, that's what I do. I'm a nurse and I'm good at that. But what I didn't realise was what it taught me. And it sort of dawned on me a bit yesterday as well, as it teaches you to be a problem solver. It teaches you to be able to observe. Like I spent my career observing people's physical signs and symptoms. It's a really great asset in Parliament, but I hadn't thought of it like that. But I think too that our skills are so transferable. So the more that you can learn through your school years, through your work life, through whether you decide to go to TAFE, whether you take a vocational pathway or whether you take a university pathway, just learn as much as you can. And then that's going to set you up for your future every single time.
I was having conversations with these 2 young girls who are going into doing their HSC now. And they said, I'm so nervous, I'm not going to get it. And I said, you'll get to where you want to get to. It doesn't have to be the traditional path. And there's so many ways that if you're really passionate about it, you'll get there. And so don't stress about this moment in time because there's ways that you get there. I wanted to be a lawyer and I didn't get the marks for it, but I did law and I practiced law and I quickly left that. So we all make different decisions.
Yeah.
The last question that we have is, what advice would you give your younger self?
Wow, that's such a good one, isn't it? But I think that I'd say just be present. Be really present. It's really interesting. I was hearing something the other day about, and I hate to talk about phones and social media, but just with Mental Health Month coming up too, we're going to be putting out a few challenges to people. And I think sometimes, and I know that I'm doing it myself because they're talking about parenting and how you have to be present. And often when people, there's really big issues with people that, have a lot going on and so they can't just be present. And I think, how many times have I not been present in a conversation or in a situation because I've had my phone and my phone's clicking away and it's constantly telling me? I think I would say to people, particularly in this age, just don't be afraid, challenge yourself to put your phone away for a few hours. Do it yourself. Don't wait for your parents to say, don't have your phone at the dinner table. And don't, put it away and just actually enjoy that moment and that conversation and allow that to fill you up and to learn and to listen. And then absolutely go back and do everything that you have to do. But I just wish, particularly in the last 10 years, I'd been a little bit more present in things. So now what I've started doing is if I go into a meeting, and I ask my staff to do it as well, they don't always, but I just say, can you just leave your phone? I leave my phone in the car, or I leave my phone outside, or I flip it over so that I can't see it. Because I think sometimes we're missing a lot of the wonder around us. And I think that's a shame. So I think that's probably what I'd say. And I just think too, again, to make sure that you take that opportunity for every win that you have to make sure you do something for someone else that's less fortunate, because they won't forget that. and you'll bring them up along with you.
You are such a kind soul, and you are genuinely one of those caring people. And I remember meeting you, I think it's probably 3 years ago, and it was kind of new, and you were, worried that things might change. And I don't feel like you've changed. I feel like you've gotten more passionate. You're incredibly genuine and very authentic. And I'm so grateful that I get to work with you, but I'm very grateful that you gave this time today as well for this interview. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zoe.